Revenge films.
Hi, I'm Sarah. My husband and I have been married for 10 years. We were in a long-distance relationship before marriage, and we moved somewhere far from our parents after we got married. We didn't really try for a baby, and we also gave up on the thought completely after some time. My husband had a heart attack a few years ago when he was 43. He always liked strong-flavored food. He'd put more than enough salt when he grilled meat at home. Same goes for his everyday cooking. He would put so much salt during cooking and add more after the food was done. And he would always eat his food with various salty sauces. I always get thirsty when I watch him eat. When he had ramen, he would pour more than enough soy sauce into the greasy pork bone soup. Then he would always order extra noodles and drink every last drop of soup. Naturally, his blood pressure became high. You'll have a stroke or become seriously ill one day if you keep eating like that. Maybe you should cut down on salt a little. I warned him multiple times, but he never listened.
Stop nagging. I have a lot to deal with at work. It's stressful enough. Just let me eat whatever and however I want at home, okay?
I tried to season the food lightly when I cooked, but it didn't change anything because he would use more salty condiments when he ate. So I gave up from the 3rd year of our marriage and let him eat however he wanted. If I brought up the topic of his sodium intake, he would tell me to
Shut up!
and
Leave me alone!
which led to a fight every time. So I also gave up on persuading him. My husband and I moved a lot due to his work, so I was the one who did most of the housework. But because of my husband's unique and stubborn eating habits, we decided to eat separately on the weekends. He was always so happy to eat junk food for dinner. One day, my husband suddenly clutched his chest.
Call an ambulance!
He wailed and looked like he was in a lot of pain. I quickly called the ambulance to take him to the emergency. It was a heart attack. He underwent surgery, had 4 stents placed in his heart, and was hospitalized for a month. After he recovered a little after surgery, he started to act weird in his hospital room. He became extremely irritable. Maybe he couldn't accept that he had had a heart attack at his age. I thought he'd finally start watching his sodium intake after this experience, and I even bought cookbooks for low-sodium recipes. However, the actual reason he got irritable after the surgery was startling. One of the nurses in the hospital told him, "Your wife was very calm when you were sent here." And my husband apparently didn't like that. What an idiot. He said,
I know you'll say, I told you so. But I was in a critical condition. How could you act so calmly? You're a cold-hearted person.
My husband had the heart attack at night, and I sat alone for hours in the empty, dimly lit waiting area. Sometimes I could hear some noise inside the operating room and wondered what was happening. I was so scared and anxious during the wait. I called my mother-in-law and told her about the situation in case something went wrong. A heart attack? How can he have a heart attack when he's still so young? It was your responsibility to take care of him. How can you live with yourself if anything happens? She yelled at me over the phone. I cried so much after I hung up. How could she yell at me when her cooking was the main contributor to my husband's salt cravings? No one can eat normally after growing up eating strong flavored food. I still remember asking for my mother-in-law's advice when I went to her home, but she just laughed and said, "He's always been like that." Maybe the nurse thought I was calm because I had already thought the worst. I was so happy and relieved when I finally saw his bed coming out of the operating room. He became quiet after I argued back. Then I gradually started to lose feelings for my husband. If he had apologized and said something like,
I'm sorry for not listening to your warnings. It's all my fault.
then I would have been happier and probably would say something like, "Let's work together. It's time that you change your eating habits. I know we can do it together." However, we were cooped up at home because of the pandemic, which didn't help improve our relationship either. We didn't get along like we used to and stopped talking as much. When my husband asked me to visit his parents for the holidays, I told him to go alone. Part of the reason was the ongoing pandemic, and the main reason was that I saw my mother-in-law's true nature after that phone call at the hospital. I couldn't forget what she said and was still angry about it. My husband ended up going to my in-laws' home alone for the holidays. When he came back home in January, he said,
I'll let it pass this time, but you better go with me next time when I visit them. My mom was so looking forward to seeing you.
I replied, I'll see if I feel like going and let you know when that time comes.
I've had enough. You're so unpleasable.
I'm unappeasable? Did you forget to say something to me? I was insulted by you and your mother, but you've never apologized. Not once. My husband became silent again. You always give the silent treatment when it's convenient for you. The next day, he handed me some divorce documents. I had already considered divorcing him many times, so I was fine with the divorce. I had always known this day would come, so I quickly signed the documents. I couldn't see anything positive in spending the rest of my life with him. I had already lost feelings for him, and to be honest, I didn't want to learn new recipes for him anymore, because he had brought it all on himself. I wanted normal food. Even though I wasn't working a full-time job, I knew there were so many things I could do to restart my life. My husband didn't expect me to sign the divorce documents without hesitation. I quit my job after marriage, and we relocated twice in 7 years, so I had only been working part-time. My husband's salary wasn't high, and I knew he didn't have much savings, dividing property. He thought that I wouldn't divorce him because I was 40 and had no stable job. I could find a job easily if I weren't picky about work, and it was easy to get a job in my hometown. I'd rather start everything over than continue to live in an unpleasant life with my husband. Yes, let's get a divorce. I could tell how upset he got.
Wait a minute, let's talk!
He said. But I had already signed the documents and couldn't be more certain about the decision. So I said to him, you brought the divorce documents to me and asked me to sign them. And now you want to talk? What do you think marriage is, a joke?
I'm busy with work every day. Let's talk about this and make the decision when we visit my parents later this month.
I lost my patience with him. Talk won't change anything. Besides, I've already told you I don't want to go visit your parents. Do you ever listen to me? You brought me the divorce documents. You understand what that means, don't you? He brought the divorce documents home, but decided to stall the divorce. I was stunned by how ridiculous and pathetic he was. Later, he finally realized there was no turning back, and nothing he said could ever change my mind. He had no choice but to agree to the divorce. Because he shredded the divorce documents he brought home, I had to go get them again the next day. He also decided to quit his job and move back in with his parents. His mother was so excited when he told her about the decision. I can take good care of your diet now. I didn't think my ex-mother-in-law, who had cooked salty food for decades, could suddenly adopt a healthy cooking style. It's like trying to get my ex-husband to adopt healthy eating habits. I knew it'd also be an enormous challenge for my ex-mother-in-law to change her habits. I was surprised by how salty her dishes were every time we visited them. Of course, it'd be like heaven for my ex-husband to go back home and eat his favorite food. I could already imagine what was going to happen. My ex-husband contacted me less than a year after the divorce and told me his mother had passed away. She had type 2 diabetes for a long time because of years of excessive salt intake. My ex-husband asked me,
Can we get back together?
I couldn't believe what I had heard. He then told me he had also developed diabetes, and he had diabetic nephropathy, which is a common complication of diabetes. He was put on dialysis, and his prognosis didn't look good. In short, he needed my kidney. That was the reason he wanted to get back with me. He wants me to be his living donor.
The doctor said I need to have a healthy diet. I can't do that by myself. I also need your kidney. I promise I'll never complain about your cooking again. Can we please get back together? I don't want to die!
Listen, there's no starting over between us whatsoever. What you're going through right now, you had it coming. Remember how you used to disregard my warnings and tell me to shut up? Anyways, take care. I answered him coldly and hung up the phone. Then I blocked his number. It was scary to think that he had asked for my kidney, We've stopped contacting each other since then. Rumor has it that my husband's condition has gotten worse. He became blind and couldn't take care of himself, so he started living in a care home. I moved back in with my parents after my divorce. I got a job and have been helping around the house. I want to spend time with my parents as much as I can. I couldn't be happier about my peaceful life now.
I live with my wife and her mother. 2 years after I got married, my wife's mother became unwell, which was when we started to live under the same roof as my mother-in-law. My father-in-law is still around too, but he was living on his own in a different place for work and was not able to take care of his wife. My wife works part-time at a supermarket, and I work full-time for a company from home. My wife suggested that we take turns taking care of her mother.
I only work part-time and you're able to work from home. So I think this will work out, even without your father's help.
My father-in-law was busy with work, so I agreed that this was the best thing to do at the time. But when my mother-in-law began to live with us, my wife would use her work as an excuse and make me take care of her mother on my own.
I need to leave the house to get to work. You get to work from home, so you have more time on your hands than I do. I need you to take care of my mother when I'm out. I mean, she's your mother too now.
The only thing that my wife did for her mother was buy her dessert on the way back from work. I was the only one taking care of her mother. But in the eyes of my wife, we were doing it together. My mother-in-law would have her good days and bad days. One day, I told my wife that her mother was having one of her bad days.
You should take her to the hospital. That's the obvious thing to do. You don't need to check with me each time, just do it.
You have the day off the day after tomorrow. I think you should take your mother to the hospital and ask the doctor how she's doing. I think that your mother would be more comfortable having her daughter with her.
Why do I have to take her on my day off? I don't get that many days off. Let me use that day for myself.
My wife always emphasized the fact that I work from home, making it seem like I'm getting it easy. But working from home wasn't unusual nowadays. And it's not like I was slacking off. I was being paid decently for the work that I do. My wife seemed to think that her job was more important because she actually left the house every time she went to work. I showed her that I was making a decent amount for my work, but she still wouldn't take me seriously. I'm working full time, and she's your mother. Aren't you worried about her condition?
You have it so easy working from home. The company can't even tell if you're working or doing something else. I'm tired from going to work. I need you to take care of my mother.
I didn't feel like arguing anymore, so I moved my meetings and made time to take my mother-in-law to the hospital the following day. As I made my way to the hospital with my mother-in-law, one of our neighbors started talking to us.
Hello, are you taking your mother-in-law to the hospital today?
Yes, she hasn't been feeling well these days.
You must be so busy with work and taking care of your mother-in-law. If only your wife wasn't so.
Huh? My neighbor looked at me with an uneasy expression.
Well, I heard a rumor that some people saw your wife in town.
In town?
I think she was with her friend on all those occasions.
What was her friend like?
A young man, but they're probably just friends, so no need to get any wrong ideas.
She left after saying that. That night, I stayed up thinking about what my neighbor had said to me. It didn't seem unrealistic. My wife would leave the house often these days, be it to go shopping or to go see her friends. There were times she came home late. But I didn't want to confront my wife for something that I wasn't sure about. I didn't want to upset her for no reason. Even after a week had passed, I still had doubts. So I decided to hire a private investigator to find out the truth. One day, I woke up and found that my wife had already left the house. I checked our backyard, but she was nowhere to be seen. When I went to the living room, I saw that she had left a letter for me. It said,
I've gone to Hawaii with a friend. Take care of my mom while I'm away.
I then came to a realization. Although I hadn't received any news from my private investigator yet, I was certain that my wife was cheating on me. I then decided to check our bank records. I saw that she had used up all of our savings! I was worried about my marriage, but at the same time, I had to worry about my mother-in-law's health. I went to check on my mother-in-law and saw that she was very sick. Are you all right? I checked her temperature and could feel that she had a high fever. I called the ambulance and then my wife. My wife didn't pick up her phone, so I left her a message saying that her mother wasn't feeling well and that I had called an ambulance. I asked her to come home right away. But she ignored my messages and calls. I then got in touch with my father-in-law. I told him that I was having a hard time getting in touch with his daughter. My father-in-law made his way home as soon as possible. I continued to try to reach my wife, but in the end, I wasn't able to get in touch with her. My mother-in-law passed away soon after my father-in-law had arrived at the hospital. My father-in-law had tried to get in touch with his daughter too, but her phone was turned off and she was unreachable. A few days after that, my wife finally called me back.
I had a great trip. So, how's Mom?
What the hell are you saying? She's passed away while you were ignoring her calls. You even missed her funeral.
What?
My father-in-law shouted at his daughter and told her to return to Japan right away. As soon as my wife got back to the house, her father slapped her hard in the face. What were you thinking?
I was in Hawaii with a friend. I left my husband a letter before leaving.
Then tell me what these are! I handed some photos to my wife. The photos showed her with her lover going to various places together. There was even a photo of her and her lover at the airport on the day that they left for Hawaii together.
Why would you have me followed? Don't you trust me?
You have no right to get mad at Mark! Had I known you had been up to all this! I can't believe you made Mark take care of your mother on his own! And you were out there having fun with your lover! We called you so many times before your mother passed away, and you ignored the calls! You're so selfish and unforgivable! My father-in-law began to hit my wife in anger.
Stop. Please don't hit me.
I don't consider you to be my daughter anymore! I'm so mad at you! My father-in-law was shaking with anger. After catching his breath, he said to his daughter, I'd enrolled in life insurance for your mother in case anything happened to her. As her spouse, I will get those insurance payments. But as for my heir, you are going to inherit that money. When I die, I'm going to leave everything to Mark because he was the one that took care of your mother.
Dad, you can't be serious. I'm her actual daughter.
Mark plans to divorce you now that your mother's funeral is over. I fully respect his decision. No one wants to stay married to a cheating and selfish wife.
But that means he won't be a part of this family anymore. More the reason not to give him your money.
This is what your mother would have wanted too. She was very grateful to Mark until the very end. She didn't mention you at all.
I can't believe that this is happening.
My father-in-law made his daughter sign the divorce papers. And I was finally free from my evil wife. Now that I had the money that was initially intended for her, she called me every night in tears and begged me to take her back.
Please forgive me. I made a huge mistake. I love you.
I sensed that she was only saying this because she wanted the money for herself. Soon after that, my father-in-law gave me half of the insurance money. After my divorce was finalized, I moved out and got my own place with the money that I received from my father-in-law. My father-in-law kicked my ex-wife out of the house and put up the house for sale. My ex-wife had to get multiple jobs to pay for her living expenses and the alimony payments that she owed me. But she couldn't earn enough to get her own place, so she had to spend nights in the internet cafes. In the end, though, it was her fault for mistreating her family in the way that she did. She probably will live like this for many years to come, but that is something she will need to put up with as punishment. I feel bad that my mother-in-law didn't get to see her daughter before she passed away, but I don't feel bad at all about getting divorced from my ex-wife.
Hey, my name is Tori, and I have an intrusive and overbearing mother-in-law. She always complains and nags about my mistakes while refusing to admit any of hers. I only had one child back then, and my parents never considered it a problem. But my mother-in-law was not happy about it. How can you have just one child? You have to have more children. The problem is, my husband is her only child. Later, I found out I was pregnant with my second child. The due date was at the end of the year, but the doctor discovered the baby was breech, so I decided to have a C-section earlier than my due date. During the time I was hospitalized, my 2-year-old son would go to daycare during the day, and my mother would take care of him at night. My mother lives with my grandmother on my father's side. My grandmother needs constant care, so a caretaker would come to assist her during the day. While my grandmother is cared for, my mother will go to work and return home before the caretaker leaves. So my mother couldn't look after my son all day. At first, I wanted to get a private room so my family could stay with me at the hospital. It was my first C-section, and I wasn't sure how fast I could recover after the surgery. Because I was a little anemic after the surgery date was set, I started worrying about a lot of things. So I decided to let my son stay with me from the 3rd day after I had the baby. Everything would be a lot easier if my husband could look after our son, but unfortunately, he was on a business trip. The nurse at the hospital warned me about the risk. She said, "Your family can stay with you in a family room, including your son, but it's unclear whether your IV is done until about 3 days after birth. It could be dangerous to have small children running around in your room. It's better to have someone to look after your son." Around that time, I told my mother-in-law I was going to have a C-section when she asked me about the delivery. When I told her that my son would be in daycare during the day and my mother would look after him in the evening, she said, "What? You're leaving him all day at the daycare? Oh, I feel bad for him. He'll have to stay in an unfamiliar environment every day for such a long time. Your mother also has to take care of your grandmother, right? It's not easy for her to care for 2 people at the same time. But it's dangerous to let him stay with me at the hospital. There will be a lot of medical equipment around my bed. I can't risk letting him touch those. Also, I won't be able to hold him for a while. I don't want him to feel neglected." "I see. I'll watch him for you then." "Really? But it's the year's end. I'm sure you're busy." "Yeah, I was planning to go on a vacation with my friend, but the hotel we wanted to stay at is fully booked for the holidays, so we decided to cancel the trip. I'll have time to watch him." "Oh, I see." My mother-in-law always gave me a hard time, but she was surprisingly helpful and understanding this time. Maybe she's happy that the second child is on the way. I decided to take her up on the offer to take care of my son for the first 3 days after birth. Then I called the daycare to cancel my son's stay. When I got home, I packed a bag for my son to give to my mother-in-law. However, my mother-in-law called me 2 days before my surgery. "Sorry, Tori, I need to talk to you about something." "What happened?" "Well, I can't look after your son now. I'm so sorry," she explained. "The hotel called and said there's a vacancy because someone has canceled their booking, so I'm going on that vacation as planned with my friend. That hotel is very difficult to book. It's a dream come true that I can be there for New Year's. I'll bring you souvenirs." She sounded very excited. "But don't worry, your father-in-law will look after your son," she said. My father-in-law is a workaholic and has bad legs, and he really doesn't know how to deal with kids. And because my mother-in-law said she would have time for my son, I had already called the daycare for cancellation. It was so irresponsible of her to change her mind at the last minute. "You can't do this! I've already canceled the daycare because you said you would look after my son!" "Oh, right! You were gonna send him to daycare! Why don't you ask him again?" Kindergartens and elementary schools are all closed for the holidays, so daycares are all full at this time of the year. I can't get him to stay in any of the daycares now. "Can't you ask your mother, my son, to take time off work and look after him?" "I'll ask my mother, but I don't know if she can take leave on such short notice. My husband went on a business trip this morning. I can't make him come back now, can I?"
Then how about letting your son stay at the hospital with you? That's why you got the private room in the first place, right? There are so many nurses in the hospital. Can't they help take care of him?
It's not their job to take care of my son. They won't do it, and I won't ask them to do it.
Then I'm sure your son can stay home alone for a day or so. It's not like he's gonna die or something.
Excuse me? Are you kidding me? I was so frustrated and stunned by my mother-in-law's selfishness. Then she said,
Give me a few minutes. I'll call my friends and ask.
and she hung up. Is she going to help me find someone to take care of my son? I then called all the daycares in the area, but they were all full as expected. I never expected I would have my second child with so much anxiety. My mother-in-law called back 30 minutes later.
Rest assured, Tori, it's gonna be fine.
What do you mean?
I asked my neighbors about C-sections, and they said it's fine to get out of bed and walk around the next day.
What?
Your father-in-law wants to join me on the trip, so neither of us can help you at this time. Sorry.
I was infuriated by my mother-in-law's irresponsible and selfish behavior. She is the one who's always asked me to have a second child, but now she just acts like it has nothing to do with her. You know what? I don't need your help. I'll figure something out myself. When I was trying to calm myself down, my mother-in-law said,
Don't you think you're a little spoiled, Tori? You made the decision to have a second child. Why would you want to rely on others instead of taking care of everything yourself? Girls nowadays can't even pop out a baby without other people's help? That's so stupid.
Of course I would care for my children once I recovered from the surgery, but I was having my first C-section. I wouldn't have the energy to watch over a 2-year-old and stop him from running around in the room. That's why I asked the daycare and my mother to look after my son in the beginning. I had no choice but to ask for my friends' help. And 2 of my friends who have children agreed to help. They said they would each look after my son for a day and stay with him until it was time to pick up their children from daycare. My mother also asked for half-day leave so she could start babysitting after my friends left. Everything seemed to work out. After I told my husband about the situation, he talked to his boss and was able to end his business trip earlier than planned. So my friends and mother took care of my son the first 2 days, and my husband returned on the 3rd. My husband stayed home with our son until I was discharged from the hospital a few days later. He was also angry about my mother-in-law's selfish behavior. When my mother-in-law returned from her vacation, she came to the hospital as if nothing had happened. She brought me souvenirs and said,
I want to see my grandchild.
My husband said to her,
Your daughter-in-law was risking her life here to have this baby. How could you put a trip with your friends before this? More importantly, I would have asked for time off instead of going on a business trip if you had told us you would change your mind so easily. Your selfishness caused everyone a great deal of trouble. At least be sorry for breaking your promise to her. If you don't even feel that way, you failed as a human being.
Then he asked her to leave. After that, every time my mother-in-law tried to meddle in my parenting, I would tell her, I can't trust you when it comes to my children. I would remind her of what she did and reject her advice. When she hurt her back and couldn't move, I said, You'll be fine in no time, don't worry. Just like what she said about my C-section. I distanced myself from her as much as possible. Soon, she started to feel anxious about growing old. As a result, she finally stopped meddling in my life and became a little more mature than before.
Hi, my name is Sherry. When I was 10, I began to live with my sister, who is 12 years older than me. It all started when our father told us we were going on a family vacation.
Dad, I'm so excited! We're gonna take the train, right?
That's right, Sherry. It's gonna be fun.
We were all excited about the upcoming trip. I even planned with my mother and sister what to eat and where to go. I was in 4th grade at the time, and it was the first vacation in my life. I was so excited that I couldn't sleep the night before. However, I was dismayed the next morning. Around the time we were supposed to leave home, my father said,
It's about time. Let's go.
It's been a while since we traveled together.
My grandparents were at our front door carrying their luggage. My father put on his shoes and said to my mother,
Okay, I'll go now. Oh, and I'm not buying any souvenirs, okay?
Then he left the house with my grandparents. I thought my grandparents were going on the trip with us, so I said,
Wait, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, wait for me.
I put my shoes on hastily and followed them outside. Sherry, stop! My sister tried to stop me, but I didn't hear her and quickly ran to my father. But he had a disgusted look when he saw me.
What are you doing? Are you trying to follow us?
I froze at his words and still didn't understand what was happening.
What? Aren't we going on a family trip?
I asked. My father replied,
Yeah, I'm going on a trip with my family. My mother, my father, and I. Did you think I was going with you guys? How stupid are you? See you when I'm back.
My father scoffed, and he went to my grandparents. Then I went back home and broke down into tears. My mother and sister realized what my father was up to when my grandparents showed up at our door in the morning. But I was too young to understand anything. Even though my father was cold to me, I still didn't realize I wasn't included on the family trip. I hate them! I hope they have an accident and die! My sister vented her anger while trying to comfort me. Later, my sister told me our father and grandparents had been bullying my mother for as long as she could remember. My grandparents used to say to my mother,
You're so lazy.
I didn't know what she meant. I thought she was talking about my mother's cooking. But apparently, that was not what they meant. When my mother and sister complained to my father about my grandparents, he replied,
It was your fault, wasn't it?
and didn't take it seriously. But this time, my mother and sister thought my father was planning our family trip. They were happy that he finally decided to do something nice for us. They thought he had changed, so they didn't ask anything and let my father make the travel plans however he wanted. But as it turned out, my father was still the same as before. That's why my sister got furious when she found out my father had planned a trip to bully us again. Not long after, my sister got a new job and decided to move out. My sister tried many times to talk to my mother into getting a divorce. Sherry is still young. I can't let her live without her dad. My mother was always hesitant about divorce. All right then. I'll move out and bring Sherry with me. Go ahead if you want to keep living with that man. So I moved out with my sister. After my sister and I left, my father let my grandparents move into our home. So me and my sister's room became theirs. My mother had no choice but to start living with them. My mother would come to see me at my sister's place during the day when my sister went to work. Then she'd complain about my father and grandparents and even badmouth my sister to me. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me to listen to her complaints. My sister always said, "Leave it to your big sister. I'll take good care of you." And she would give me everything she could. But my mother would say, "Come home and live with your dad again." And she tried to pull me away from my sister. I could feel my father didn't treat us like family, and I didn't want to go back home and live with him at all. But at the same time, I felt insecure and worried about being abandoned. So I was always anxious when waiting for my sister to return home. "I'm going to be late today, so don't wait up for me and go to bed early." Even when my sister sent me messages and told me to go to bed, I would stare at the front door and wait for her to come home. Later, my mother finally moved in with us. My father died of severe illness caused by unhealthy lifestyle. My grandparents on my mother's side passed away long ago, so my mother had nowhere else to go. "Your father didn't know how to take care of himself, so I had to stay and take care of him." My mother stood by my father till the end. My sister replied, "He got what he deserved." Then my grandmother said, "You're as arrogant as your mother. I can't believe how cold-hearted you are. But my sister couldn't care less about them and kicked them out of the house. And she quickly sold the house and land. My sister always told me, "You don't need to worry about a thing. Leave everything to me." Now that I think about it, it must have been hard for my sister. She grew up with a mother who didn't work or do much housework. So I said to her,
Tell me how I can help. I want to help out.
"I told you not to worry about anything. All right, you can help cook dinner once in a while if you want." I started to learn how to cook, but the food I made wasn't that good. But my sister always said, "It's delicious," and ate everything I made. By the way, my father used to be nice to my mother before her parents passed away. So my sister has a memory of him being kind, but I've never seen that. And the reason my sister and I have such a big age gap is that my mother thought maybe my father would be nice to her again if she had another baby. But that didn't happen, as she had hoped. My mother knew how much I loved my sister, but she still wouldn't stop talking behind her back. "It was cold of your sister to abandon your dad like that." I hated it so much when my mother said those kinds of things. My sister is now married and doesn't live with me anymore. She has a kind husband and a healthy baby. I never told my sister about how my mother talked behind her back. But my mother still speaks ill of her all the time. I asked my mother multiple times, "Don't you think you owe my sister a lot? You get to live a comfortable life because of her. She has never done anything wrong." But she always said, "You are too young to understand anything, Sherry. She took you away from your dad and me. Now you won't even listen to me because of her. I can't believe you've become a child who doesn't know right from wrong. It's all your sister's fault. She ruined everything." She would always blame everything on my sister. At the same time, she would act completely different when she called my sister. "I'm sorry for always troubling you. You deserve to be happy." I really hate how my mother acts like a good person in front of my sister. But I could never tell my sister the harsh things our mother said behind her back. My sister seemed to know my mother's personality very well. "Come live with us, Sherry. I have a guest room saved for you," she said. My other relatives once told me, my mother had been telling them I was a useless daughter. She said I was supposed to help her rekindle her relationship with my father, but that didn't happen, so I was useless. She even said that it was depressing for her to see my face, so I decided to move out from home and get a place near my sister's house after graduating high school. My mother doesn't work, so my sister has been supporting us financially. But my sister secretly told me she had plans to cut our mother off once I moved out. For some reason, my mother seems to think I'll live with her forever. "Unlike your sister, you're slow and not good at anything. But it's okay if you can't get married. We can take care of each other," she said. "I'm leaving you soon, Mom. I'm sorry for being useless. I'll live my own life now, so please don't ever bother me again."
My parents divorced when I was 3. My father took me in, and I lived with my grandparents on my father's side. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I began hanging out a lot in an apartment where a woman my father's age and a boy 3 years younger than me lived. I was still young at the time, and I perceived her as a friend of my father's and her child. But it turned out the woman was someone who had started a relationship with my father and her son. My father and the woman hit it off because they were both divorcees with children and the same age. They continued to develop a relationship, and they remarried around the time I was in elementary school. My grandparents were in favor of my father marrying again because he was still young and I was still young. But they didn't have a good impression of my ex-stepmother. The reason was that my ex-stepmother was suffering from depression and used to take me and my ex-stepbrother to see a psychiatrist. So she was very moody. I thought the psychiatric hospital my ex-stepmother went to was a normal hospital at the time. But when I heard unusual screams coming out of nowhere in the hospital, I was very shaken up. Our family had a 2-family house when my father was first married, So we decided to have my grandparents live on the first floor and us on the second floor. My father was often away from home on night shifts or business trips because of his job. So I spent most of my time with my mother and my younger brother. But back then, even though they weren't related to me by blood, I was happy to have a mom I adored and a little brother who was adorable. But then, after a while, just as I was getting used to my new life, things started to get a little weird. I have had many likes and dislikes since I was a child. And although things have improved somewhat since my ex-stepmother came, there were still a few things I couldn't eat compared to my stepbrother. So then, my ex-stepmother started to say, "How come your stepbrother can eat it, but you can't? If you hate it so much, you don't have to eat anything anymore." This level of intensity might be expected in any family, but I was gradually being compared to my ex-stepbrother in some way and being treated differently. For example, only my ex-stepbrother gets to have the games he wants. My ex-stepbrother has a 6 p.m. curfew, but I have a 4 p.m. curfew. As for bedtime, my ex-stepbrother can stay up until whatever time he wants. But as for me, I need to go to bed at 8 p.m. And it escalated rapidly. And eventually, my ex-stepmother stopped cooking for me. Also, when winter came, it got cold when we went to bed. And my ex-stepbrother and ex-stepmother were able to sleep in a warm, heated room. However, "You're good enough over here." She made me sleep alone in a room without heat. Plus, there were no warm blankets, just a flimsy comforter, and I was too cold to sleep. When I couldn't sleep at night, I was at the brink of falling asleep at school the next day. Especially since the school classrooms were heated, which was very comfortable for me. But when I fell asleep like that, I couldn't get through the classes, and my grades kept dropping. Then, my ex-stepmother would say, "Your stepbrother gets a perfect score, but you get an awful score? You're such an idiot. You're not even my child." She became increasingly hostile towards me. I managed to eat my meals at school lunches, but still, my body slowly lost weight. My father wasn't home at the time, but my grandparents, who lived on the first floor, called him to tell him I might not be feeling well. My grandparents never dreamed that my mother wasn't feeding me. But they were worried that I might be suffering from some serious illness because of my gradual weight loss. Of course, my father told my ex-stepmother about it. But apparently, she told him that nothing had changed. But he was still worried. So one day, he took a day off and came home. And he thought if I had a problem, he was going to ask. When my father came home, I was in the very midst of being physically tortured by my ex-stepmother. My father heard my mother yelling, so he hurried to the living room, where he saw me defending myself like a turtle shell, and my ex-stepmother, looking like a demon, beating me as hard as she could with the vacuum cleaner. And the next moment,
What do you think you're doing?
and just when I heard my father yell, my ex-stepmother's body flew up right in front of me. Then I realized my father had hit her. My father breathed with his whole body, expressing his anger.
What did you do to my daughter?
Then my stepmother said, "You married me, so it's only natural that you only care for my child. This child was born to your ex-wife, and I wanted you to get rid of her as soon as possible. But you didn't act on it at all. So I took it upon myself to get her to run away from home."
Are you kidding me? My daughter is my precious family. I don't need a mother who can't take care of my daughter. Now get the heck out of my house!
Then my father came up to me and said,
I'm sorry I didn't know about this until your grandparents told me.
Then all the anxiety, sadness, and pain I'd been carrying until then came out in tears all at once. And I cried a lot with my father there. After that, my ex-stepmother was kicked out of the house by my father. And after that, the divorce was finalized. My father told me,
I'm not getting married from now until you're of age.
After that, we had a proper discussion. And it was settled with my ex-stepmother and ex-stepbrother leaving our house. My father used a lawyer to get my ex-stepmother to pay him alimony for me. He really wanted to turn her in. But then my stepbrother would have been institutionalized. so he decided to hold off on that. But when she started living with my father, she was a housewife and lived without any inconvenience. But now, she has to work part-time to pay her living expenses and alimony. And she repeatedly told my father, "I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. I was depressed. I had no choice. Please don't leave me." My father never forgave her for what she did to me. I guess he felt sorry for me because I was spending more time with my grandparents instead of my father, who was just so busy. So one day, he got me a dog. I've always loved dogs, so I was in a good mood to have a best friend. I thought I'd forgotten about my ex-stepmother. But one day, as I was running around the neighborhood walking my puppy, I saw a small car driving alongside me, and inside was her. My ex-stepmother grinned at me as I stopped in my tracks, flustered. "It's been a while. How's your father doing? I'm sorry about that time. I'll be nicer to you from now on, so let's live together again. I'm sure your father will reconsider if you say yes." I was horrified when she said that. I didn't say anything, just took the dog and ran away as fast as I could. Then, we heard some crazy stories about my ex-stepmother robbing her best friend's house, shoplifting, and so on. But when my father found out that she had reached out to me,
If this continues, she may harm you someday.
so he suggested that we sell the two-family house we live in with my grandparents and move to a new place. I didn't want to see my ex-stepmother again either, so I decided to listen to my father. As a result, my grandparents ended up moving with us to a new city. Sometime later, my father was contacted by an acquaintance, who was a good friend of his in the city where we used to live. Apparently, when she saw a young, beautiful woman hanging laundry in the house with the new residents, my ex-stepmother thought my father had married a new woman and attacked her with a shovel in the yard. Fortunately, the husband was nearby, so no one was injured. But they called the police and arrested her. The fact that she was holding a shovel made it clear that she was trying to kill her. And it was treated as an attempt, so she ended up in jail. My father, given what happened to me, he said,
I made the mistake of showing her kindness that time. It would be safer for the child to have people like that monitored in a cell.
Then time passed and I came of age. My father found a good match after that, and I encouraged him to remarry, thinking she would be the one. But after all these years, he stubbornly kept the promise he made then. But from now on, I'm an adult, and I want my father to be happy this time.
My boyfriend and I have been together since college, and we were both intent on marrying. In the beginning, he was a regular customer at where I worked part-time, and I fell in love at first sight. With the help and support from my boss and fellow employees, I finally got the courage to ask him out. So it was about time we started to talk about introducing each other to our parents. On that day, I was visiting my boyfriend's place. Usually, we went out somewhere on our dates, so it had been a while since I last went to his place. Wow, this place is pretty tidy.
For real? I still think this is more on the dirty side, not gonna lie.
My room is far messier than this. We were talking this manner as we watched TV, but I happened to come across this photo album. Is this your photo album?
Huh? Yeah, it is.
Oh, mind if I take a peek?
No, I don't mind.
Let's see here. Aw, so cute! In the album were many photographs of him when he was a child, but my hand, shifting through the pages, suddenly stopped. Huh? What am I looking at? There, in front of my eyes, was a family picture of him, his mother, and his father, who strangely looked exactly like my own dad. Hey, is this your dad?
Yeah, he is. And that was before he and my mother got divorced.
At that instant, a horrifying thought sparked to life in my mind. Hey, I'm really sorry. I don't feel too well. I'm gonna head home. I practically ran out of his room as I said so. There's just no way! Why is his father my daddy? I started to panic and I couldn't think straight anymore. He did mention he barely remembered anything from his childhood, but if he is my dad's child, then there was a possibility that he and I could be half-siblings. I told myself I must have seen wrong, since it was an old photograph, but my dad had one characteristic that perfectly matched his.
One of his ring fingers is shorter because of a car accident. His father also had a shorter ring finger. Frankly, there's zero chance that two different people would wind up with exactly the same injury scar, not to mention the fact that he had my own dad's face. Even though I knew we could be siblings in a way, I thought my love for him would somehow change things. Time went on as I remained bluer than usual, and one of my coworkers noticed.
What's the matter? You weren't telling your usual stories of you and your lovey-dovey. Did he cheat on you?
I only wish he was just cheating. My coworker was shocked at what I muttered.
Oh my goodness! Honey, what happened? Tell me everything!
Once I heard those words, I couldn't hold in my emotions anymore. I burst into tears and shoved the truth in her face.
Oh, wow! You mean the man you hope to marry could turn out to be your older brother?
Yeah.
Your initial words make much more sense now.
Miss Addison tried her best to comfort me, kindly saying that nothing is the sound truth just yet, and that I should get to the bottom of this. I first decided to tell my father about all this. I confessed that I was thinking about getting married, and when I told Dad the name of whom I wanted to marry, he suddenly slapped me.
I won't allow this! Break up with him now!
How he acted pretty much confirmed my worst nightmare. So we really are siblings. I felt hopeless. Dad got furious with me and repeated over and over that I should break up with him. I didn't think there was any way I could marry him anymore, so I went to see him. But seeing his face, I couldn't help but get so emotional, and the tears kept on coming once again. I was a total wreck, and upon seeing me in this state, he tried to comfort me as he asked.
What's the matter?
I felt my chest imploding into an absolute abyss as I said, I'm telling you that we're siblings.
Wait, what? The hell do you mean?
Remember me looking through your photo album the other day? The guy in your family photo, that's my dad. You said you don't have any memories from your childhood, right? That was before my mom and dad got married. When I told Dad that you were my boyfriend, he got so angry and ordered me to break up with you. If that isn't proof related, I don't know what is. My boyfriend was stunned after hearing the whole story. He hung his head, but after a while, he said,
Let's hear what my mother has to say. I just can't let you go without hearing both of your stories.
So we decided to hear what his mother had to say together. It was my first time meeting his mother. She seemed so kind, and that made me almost cry all the more. As I told her about the whole situation, she wore a surprised face, but she listened in silence. Then my boyfriend said,
Look at this photo, Mom. Is that my dad?
He was your father, honey. Oh, what a cruel world. But she went on. He was only with us for such a short time. You were so young, you don't remember anything, do you, honey?
Huh?
We did get married, but it didn't last long, so we separated soon after.
You mean this isn't my real father?
No, it isn't. Your real father died to illness. He and I cried tears of happiness when she told us the truth. Oh, be honest here. Were you too concerned that you were actually siblings? Yes, if that were the case, we would have to break up, but our feelings couldn't cope with that. Neither of us could. Well, you can rest easy now. You two are complete strangers. I was so happy that she happily gave us her blessing to get married. But I couldn't understand why my father was so against it, so I asked him the truth. His answer was the most selfish one I'd ever heard.
I was his father, even if it was only for a year. To have him marry my own daughter, that's sickening!
Wait, that's it? I was so worried and hurt after what you said, Dad. We're in love after all.
That kind of love is polluted and disgusting! I forbid it!
If you had asked me to heed my father's words, I would spit in your face. I decided to ignore him. But he totally crossed the line when he got outraged over the fact that I wouldn't break up with my boyfriend.
This scumbag is trying to get married to his sister! He's a disgusting slimeball!
He was spreading false information without any proof. And he was spoiling my boyfriend's name. Obviously, I immediately went to protest. Stop spreading that stupid rumor, Dad. He's having such a hard time.
Huh. Since you two won't call it quits.
Of course we won't. We aren't even related, the two of us.
If you and that baboon tie the knot, that would mean I'd see the face of my ex again. Like hell I'm gonna let that happen.
I was fed up with him. trying to get everything to be a happily ever after only for himself. He went to where I worked and spread the same plague, psychologically backing me into a corner with no escape, trying his hardest to prevent us from marrying. But my coworkers had already heard everything about what was going on, so they weren't deterred. However, upon hearing that he was harassing me and her son, my boyfriend's mother flew into a rage and counteracted. She said, "You, who found another woman soon marrying me to create an excuse to divorce me, have no right to meddle in their affair. What a disgrace to mankind." My boyfriend and I were shocked to hear those words, but perhaps the womanly spirit acted up. But my mother started to do a background check on her husband. Then it was found that my father was cheating on Mom.
No, this isn't what you think!
He tried making excuses, but evidence that rendered all of that useless started to arise. His partner in cheating was his superior's wife. Mom sent in all the evidence to where my father worked, and obviously the cat was out of the bag, and he was fired. Furthermore, his furious superior seems to have demanded a large sum of compensation, and Mom also went on to demand some of her own. Plus, the house he lived in was originally my grandmother's, on my mother's side, so he also lost his living quarters. I found out later on, but the real reason why he was so against me marrying my boyfriend was because he thought the fact he cheated on his ex would be leaked to the public if he had anything to do with my boyfriend. If something like that ever got out, then his cheating, note the present progressive tense, on his current wife would also become apparent. The irony was that my boyfriend's mother backlashed him for what he did and spilled everything. Later on, with both our mother's warm blessings, we tied the knot without any problems. As for my father, who had lost his job and house, went back to his home, but it being a small town, the rumors spread quickly, and even his elderly parents looked down on him. He's apparently becoming a complete recluse at such an age.
My name is Amy Lynn. Shortly after starting college, I found out about my mother's infidelity. My parents divorced when I was in 8th grade because of my father's infidelity. And my mother remarried 2 years later. I didn't think much of it at the time. But it would mean that while she was still in a committed relationship with my previous father, my mother was also having an affair and making a lover somewhere else. And that would be my stepfather. As a side note, it seems that my stepfather also had a wife and child when he was dating my mother. So that meant that they were both having affairs. My mother harshly accused my father of cheating on her before the divorce. But now that I think about it, I feel like my mother can't speak for others in a big way either. I never had good memories of my previous father. So I was always grateful to my stepfather for providing for me and my brother, and loving us even more than my previous father did. What I write from this point on will be the ordeal experienced by me, a college student, and my brother, a high school student at the time. On the day the Great East Japan earthquake struck, I felt a moderate tremor in my area. And my mother, brother, and I gathered in the living room to watch the earthquake early warning and the terrible devastation in the Tohoku region on TV. It occurred to me that my mother was calling someone on her cell phone away from us. At first, I thought she was contacting my stepfather, but judging by her tone and demeanor, she was clearly talking to someone that wasn't him. In addition, my mother had a habit of turning up the volume on her cell phone to the maximum, and a man's voice, not my stepfather's, was leaking from the phone. At that point, I had a bad feeling. I was later told that my brother had his suspicions at this point too. At that moment, my mother said, "Take care of the house. I have somewhere to go." "Hey, wait! Where are you going? You're just going to leave us here? I'm sorry." And then she left. We were stunned, and anger welled up in us. She came back 3 hours later, shortly before my stepfather returned. I was also angry at her calculated behavior. That night, after my parents went to bed, I went through all the incoming and outgoing calls on my mother's phone, as well as all the texts sent and received. Either she was completely off guard, or she thought she wouldn't be found out, but there was no password on her cell phone. And it was as if she was asking to be looked at. The results showed she was guilty. I found all kinds of evidence in the emails, including a variety of romantic messages, some of which were extreme in content. I never thought the earthquake would be the reason I would discover my mother's affair. It made me feel inexplicable. As expected, the partner's name wasn't registered as his real name. but as Mr. B, and I couldn't find out his real name. However, based on the contents of the email and the time of day, I came to the conclusion that he was a regular customer at the gym my parents were using at the time. I despised my mother's humanity from the bottom of my heart. Because she had an affair with someone she met at the gym she went to with my stepfather. And the first person she checked to see if he was safe on the day of the earthquake was not my stepfather, but the person she was having an affair with. I owed my stepfather a great deal, so the idea that my mother had betrayed him troubled me all night long. I pondered whether or not I should tell this matter to my brother, who was preparing to take an exam, but he realized that something was wrong with me.
I really want to know. I'll be more curious if I don't hear it. I won't be able to concentrate on the exam.
He begged me to tell him, so I told him about how our mother was having an affair, and who she was having an affair with, and so on. My brother got pretty confused, so he and I talked it over for a while to see how things would go. Because of our father, we both had an aversion to the idea of cheating, so we just needed time to calm down. In the meantime, I forwarded my mother's incoming and outgoing call logs and flirtatious emails to my personal computer. And to get to know the person with whom she was having an affair, I asked a friend who worked at the gym to help me find out what the person looked like, and what time she goes to the gym, without mentioning the affair. I couldn't ask for his address or phone number because they are personal information, but I found out that he's a middle-aged handsome guy who's quite popular at the gym. From there, I easily learned the person's real name, occupation, family members, and where he lived from my parents' conversations, and from a very chatty lady who went to the same gym in the neighborhood. Apparently, he had a relatively close relationship with my parents, and my stepfather was able to tell me more about the man. And my mother, who is an idiot, showed me a picture of him so I could see what he looked like. I was truly disgusted that she really thought she wouldn't be found out. It turns out that the other party also had a wife and child, and that meant that they were both having affairs. He has a daughter, but she's already independent, and he currently lives with his wife. He's a government employee and earns well and lives a comfortable life. But he and his wife don't get along. He impregnated his wife in a youthful inexperience, and was half forced to marry her because his family wanted him to. I honestly thought he seemed to have a history of infidelity. I watched them for the next month or so, and as expected, the affair just got more and more heated. She started going to the gym without my stepfather, sometimes going in the morning and not coming home until late at night. But she always targeted the days when he was coming home late, so he never seemed suspicious. This isn't just temporary. I want to be with you, but right now my kids are the problem. When I saw my mother's text message to the man, it was so painful that I wanted to die. And I didn't know how to deal with her anymore, because I was confronted with the fact that my brother and I were nothing but an obstacle to her. My brother and I were both physically and emotionally exhausted, and we felt trapped because we assumed we couldn't talk to anyone about it. But things took a further turn for the worse. One day, a few weeks after a month of observation, a woman claiming to be the wife of the unfaithful partner came to our home. For better or worse, my parents were at the gym and my brother was at prep school, so I was the first to meet the woman.
Are you the daughter here?
The woman asked me, and I responded calmly. That's right. What can I do for you? Then she said,
I need to speak with you, so please get ready to come out right away. Tell your parents you're going to meet a friend.
I had a hunch that this was definitely about the infidelity, so I did as the woman asked. And at a coffee shop about an hour from my home, she confided everything to me. The woman was definitely his wife, and the details of the conversation were,
Your mother is having an affair with my husband. My husband was acting strange, so I looked into the social circle at the gym. So when I looked at his cell phone history, email history, and data folders, I found exchanges with your mother and some dodgy pictures.
The photos ranged from those of them doing the deed to those of them posing like models. As for my own mother, I felt embarrassed and ashamed.
I would give my husband and I a second chance if I could. But maybe we'll end up divorced. Of course, I can't forgive your mother for what she did. And I will make her pay alimony. But I know your family has things to deal with. Please tell your father about everything.
She said, and forced me into the role of the messenger. Perhaps that was the final straw. A few days later, I was found collapsed in a university bathroom. And after examination, I was diagnosed with an acute gastric ulcer. At about the same time, my younger brother started having muscle spasms and other physical problems. So, we both ended up in the hospital together. At this crucial point in the exam process, my brother exploded, apparently triggered by my mother saying this.
That's because you're having an affair!
He went on a screaming rampage in the hospital. All the fuss at the hospital brought my mother's infidelity to light. And of course, my stepfather heard about it. Soon after, my stepfather talked about it with my mother. But, as cheaters often say, I didn't have an affair! He just went crazy under the pressure of the exams! I think she's beyond stupid and crazy. My grandparents, who came to visit us, took a hint of what was going on.
If you know something, you should tell us everything you know.
That being said, I told them the whole story. And of course, I showed them the evidence of the files I transferred to my computer. From there, it was quick. We were sent to our grandparents' house until everything was resolved as a retreat. And my mother was forbidden to have any contact with us for a while, because we weren't comfortable with it. The man and my mother fully admitted that they were both having an affair. Based on the evidence I obtained from my independent research and the testimony of his wife, the other party ended up divorcing and paid a reasonable amount of alimony. Maybe it was because my stepfather himself had an affair with my mother before he remarried.
I'm not getting divorced because of the future of my children, but I will make sure that she settles the matter in a different way. I know my words aren't very convincing, but it's true that the affair destroyed the other party's family, and I will make sure she pays for what she did, not only to the other party's wife, but to the children for putting them in such a difficult position.
He got down on his knees and said to my grandparents, I didn't see my mother again until about 10 years later. They rented an apartment near their parents' house and lived there. But the phrase, the children are the problem, was so traumatizing that my mother wanted to see us. But we kept refusing with all our might not to see her. I saw my mother for the first time in 10 years when my stepfather called me over. And maybe it was because she was getting older, but she had aged drastically and she looked dirty. And she had cancer. They said she has 3 months to live. My stepfather told me that she misses us and wants to live together again, even if it's only for a short time before she dies. Besides, it's too late to be told such a thing now. And the words my mother once said have already taken root in the back of my mind for a long time. I thought she was a person who only thought about herself until her last breath, saying she was lonely and whatnot. My brother and I both worked and went our separate ways. So in the end, my mother passed away without her request being fulfilled. I don't mean to sound cold, but my mother brought this all on herself. I vowed to myself, after watching my mother die, that I would live a life that would never betray anyone.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.